Welcome back, everybody. You are listening to Teens No Cap. I'm your host, Charity Chafee. I'm a licensed mental health counselor specializing in the treatment of teens and their families. And I am so jazzed today to welcome our guest to the show. I'm going to give her a second to introduce herself, but this is Jamie Roberts. She's an LMFT in California, and we are here to discuss her new book. Do you want to say hi to everybody?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone out there. My name is Jamie Roberts. I am an LMFT in California. I specialize working with neurodivergent teens and young adults. So I really love working with ADHD, autism, learning differences, anxiety, and I just think teens are the coolest. So I've written 2 books for them. And so my most recent book is Neurodiversity for Teen Girls. It is a guide to understanding neurodivergent brains and sensory experiences and relationships and communication, and just a really fun book, in my opinion.
Okay, so I have ordered my copy and I'm so incredibly excited about it. But I feel silly because I didn't realize you'd already written a book.
Yes. Yes, this is my second book. So my first book was Mindfulness for Teen Anxiety. And so this it introduces mindfulness, it introduces anxiety, and then it has 45 activities within it about how to integrate mindfulness activities throughout somebody's day. And even though it's not marketed towards neurodivergence, I'm AuDHD and most of my clients are neurodivergent, so it's very sensory, hands-on, direct, and easy to apply.
Oh
So
my
this one.
gosh. I love it. Okay. So we're here to talk mostly about your second book, but I'm going to link your first one below too, just in case there is anyone that's interested in purchasing both. But
Awesome.
do you want to give us a little bit of a rundown of kind of like how you got here?
So I often say there's 2 stories. There's like the linear timeline about how my career developed, but there's also then this second story that's been added of I received a late diagnosis of both ADHD and autism in my 30s, which kind of shifted my whole clinical lens of diving into the neurodiversity paradigm and realized most of the clients I was working with, or the ones who were drawn to me, the ones I was seeking out, the work I was doing was very much in this space. And so there's like a retrospective looking back of, oh, I was that teen who didn't understand her sensory needs, who had troubles with friendships, who struggled to identify what my needs were, that was hitting burnout. And then I went to study psychology to understand why people do the things they do because I was autistic. And so there's this like double story of wanting to be a therapist, but then also, oh, now I understand why I was so interested in why people behave the way they do. And I feel like my teen years were the hardest years for myself. And then when I became a therapist, I was like, I think teens are really cool. I think they have a really great way of still being like playful and childlike, but having really big thoughts and depth of experience. And I think that's a really fun place to be where you can still be playful, but have deep thought.
Yes. I
So
love
like
you.
a
I think
roundabout way to where I got to like basically I want to be who I needed when I was younger, and so part of it is writing this book is like I wish as a girl, like so many girls are not diagnosed with neurodevelopmental differences, like we're so underdiagnosed. I wanted to put information in the hands of the girls who are exploring that or trying to understand themselves in a way that we don't have right now.
I'm just like pausing because my absolute favorite quote of all time is be who you needed when you were younger. And
Yes, mine
I
too.
think like you landed on that and I was like, you're so right. And like
Mm-hmm.
everything has led you to the point where you are now like writing and publishing books to really help other people
Yes.
understand these experiences and to help them potentially avoid or like work through all the things that like you really had to like struggle with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's the whole point. Like I was a therapist doing one-on-one. I started a group practice. I started supervising. I started teaching courses to therapists about how to work with teenagers. And now I'm writing the books of like, I just want to get this information out so teens feel seen, they feel validated, their families, their therapists are able to show up and navigate these like really difficult times. Like the teen years are hard. That's valid.
They are hard. I would say too that like they're hard and at the same time it's the first teens that have lived through life in that like sector in that like genre, and so like there's so many parents I think that struggle with understanding what their teens are going through right now, and so many like therapists, other professionals who are like, well, that's just how it is, and they don't always understand kind of like the full layer of like everything that's happening for teens in the modern day.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just in the last 20 years, how much technology has changed everything we do. Like the kids growing up now are in a whole different world than we were in 10, 15 years ago. Yeah,
Yes.
it has a huge influence over everything.
Yes. So you had kind of like had this diagnosis and it had kind of shifted and you were realizing all these pieces. What inspired you
Mhm.
to kind of put it into a book?
This is a very ADHD answer of me. I didn't think about writing a book, and I was at a presentation. I was doing a presentation on my first book for a parent group, and a parent in the audience was an acquisitions editor for a publishing house and emailed me after and was like, "Hey, let's talk about your second book." And I was like, "Great. My ADHD has 5 ideas. Let's pick one." And so this is kind of, I mean, this is really like the book I always wanted to write, but I think like the idea of it felt like a mountain that was really hard to climb until the door was open for me. And then when the door opened, I was like, okay, I can do this. I can figure this out. This is the message I want to focus on.
So tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what do you feel like the message is for this book for you?
I think the big message is there's nothing wrong with you. You're great how you are. And the big things we're trying to learn are just to be curious about ourselves, to understand what your needs are, understand how to communicate your needs to the people around you, and how to kind of just like be authentically you and how to navigate the world knowing that. And I think that's the biggest piece. So much of this book isn't like prescriptive about like this is what you need to do to feel better. It's more like, hey, here are some things you might be experiencing. What feels good to you? Here's what it looks like for different people. Different people have different sensory needs. Here's some examples. You might be sensory seeking, you might be sensory avoiding, you might be both. It might depend on the situation. All of that is fine, but you need to know what it is for you. So let's kind of navigate how to figure that out. And I think that's a big overcurrent of the whole thing of like, let's just figure out who you are and what you need and how to communicate that to the people around you.
I love that so much. I just like I think there's such a huge part with the scaffolding that you're talking about, right? And like giving people examples of like this is how this could look and this is how some people interact with that. And like that's so much of what I think teens benefit from is because when we ask these really big questions, right? If we're sitting in session, we're like, what do you feel like you need, right? I feel like so many teenagers are like, I don't freaking know.
Exactly. I don't know. Fair answer. How are you supposed to know? You haven't done this before. So I like to call it like we like a smorgasbord or a tasting board of like, let me put some things in front of you and let's taste them all and see what you like. Here are sensory things, let's try them all. Here are communication things, let's experiment and see what works for you. And that's really what it is trying different things on to figure out what works, either to be able to name it, to learn the language to describe it, or to give it a try. And if you don't like it, cool, toss it. Let's do something else.
Yes. More like I always use the word buffet for stuff like that, where it's like it at different times at different places you might want different intensities of things and like it's okay to go to the buffet and only want Chinese food and it's okay to go and want Italian food and Chinese food and some Mexican and some ice cream, right? Like it's okay to kind of be a working document.
Yes. Yes. That, yeah, I like that, to be a working document. That is so huge because, like, we are always changing and we should be always changing. And so, what was true of you last year doesn't have to stay true of you this year. And I think there's a lot of like, I hear this with parents, I hear this from adults about, like, well, I should be able to do this, or I could do this last year. Why can't I do it this year? Or they were able to manage this before. Why can't they manage it now? Well, what factors changed? Because something has changed in the last year and what they were could manage before, for some reason they can't this year. So let's figure out what factors are different and realign and set up what the expectation is or what supports we need in order to do the thing, because we're always changing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and then the other piece, and I don't know if you get into this at all in your book, is like the idea of kind of like intersectionalities, right? Because we know that like autism neurodivergency often has a chronic illness component. And then like really like we have to like be able to be present with ourselves in those moments to like really understand what we need and be okay with like the flex of it. So like talking about like, well, last year this was fine for me, right? Is so interesting because you're right. Like, what changed for you? And you could have more stress. You could be under different dynamics in the family. You could have a different boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, right? Like, all of those things like really play together. And I love the fact that your book is kind of like really allowing people to pause and just ask the questions of like, what could be helpful and what are some examples of that?
Hmm. Absolutely. I give the example a lot with my clients of like, imagine like your phone battery, and depending on what you're doing, if you're live streaming, if you're watching a show, if you're just playing a game, if you're texting, all of those are going to use different amounts of battery. And so we need to know what we're doing and how much battery it's going to take. And there might be some days you wake up and your phone stays connected to the wall because it didn't charge overnight. Or there's days you have to keep coming back to your phone. Or there's days your battery lasts the entire day. And we can do different amounts of things depending on the energy we have. And that energy varies day to day, hour to hour.
Yes. Very similar to the spoon theory.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is spoon theory, but I like feel like I had to translate it because then I'm talking to teens and I'm explaining it. They're like, "Well, you got these spoons and you wake up with spoons every day." And they're like, "My clients are autistic." And they're like, "But which spoon is it?" I'm like, "Only the good ones." So I was like, "Let me switch it up and let's do a phone battery because we've all got one of those."
No, like literally, that's so fair because I feel like there's so many people that have a hard time understanding unless the example is like really practical for their life, right? So like
Yes.
the idea of a phone battery, you're so right. Like everyone has it, right? We like understand the different things with it. We know that it's gonna draw faster if like we're watching Netflix or something, right? Such a beautiful way to kind of like reimagine the scaffolding for it in like modern day teen.
Yes. Well, so I feel like so often my role is translator. I'm either translating adult language to teen language or teen experience to adult understanding because I feel like sometimes as adults we forget what it was like being a teen and what we didn't know at that time or what was important to us. And as a teen, we may not have the full scope of language to really describe what we're going through. So being able to be that translator in therapy or in the book, like I think is really significant for everyone to understand each other.
I think so too. And I think that's a big part. Like when I do family sessions, there are definitely spaces where I'm asking parents to kind of like think back to when they were a teenager and to think back to like their experiences. And like we know that parenting comes from a space of attachment. It comes from a space of our own experiences. And like when we've reached a certain point, like we are just kind of a collection of our own experiences. And we need to understand how those influence like our parenting journeys, our clinical journeys, like any of those pieces.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's it's helpful and it's hard, right? So many of us have our own trauma and attachment wounds from just the teen years. I feel like a lot of attachment work is talked about like in that those early developmental years when we're little, but so much of attachment happens when you're a teenager. Right? It's your first relationships. It's your first friendships where you have independence. It might be when you go live on your own for the first time, like if you leave for college, like so many attachment wounds happen in the teen years as well. And we don't talk about that as much.
No, but we really should. And I think that's a part of what's like missing is like, and then when we were talking about how like you can only kind of take someone as far as you've been, I think that's often what ends up happening in like the teen parent like struggle bus is because parents are really blocked in terms of like understanding their own teen years and like what was healthy, safe, and appropriate, what was missing, right? And like we do talk so much about parenting from like birth to 10, right? And then it's kind of like after 10, everyone's like, okay, well, good luck. I hope it works out for you.
Yes, like they can survive independently, right? At that point. So I think it's really important if you're putting a kid in therapy, if you're putting a teen in therapy, that the parent is also participating either in that in a family session in their own therapy. So we're shifting the whole family system and not just putting it on the teen or not just saying, parent, you need to do this different, but everybody is doing something different to shift the whole experience.
Yes, exactly. It's like we have information now where we can like work and collaborate as like a small community, right? And we can like really understand those pieces and make small gains together. And it's so much easier when you're part of a team.
It is. It is. And if I see a lot with the parents that I work with in the neurodiversity spaces that when we're starting to integrate neuroaffirming work or shift how we're perceiving what a kid can do or where they're struggling, and we're adding this framework, is there's a whole change in how we're having to conceptualize what the kid is going to be doing with school, socializing, or with their future and what that looks like. And there can be a lot of mixed emotions for parents going through that. But a lot of it is undoing the society's shoulds. And where do those shoulds come from? And who do they serve? And who do they support? And what's the difference between like what they should be doing and what they are doing? And being able to navigate that together, I think, is a big learning space we have still.
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. And I do think like there is like so much conflict, especially with late diagnoses, right? Like, and we know girls on average are diagnosed a lot later in all of the things because of their ability to like mask and understand some like societal pieces. And it is like a huge part of the work, which is why we can't just like put teens in therapy and expect them to just be fine, right? Like teens don't exist in a vacuum. Like we have to bring the family in there. And I think when we're talking about those diagnoses in the teen years, it's like so pertinent to get the family on that page, to kind of like rapidly shift the way things are being done and said.
Absolutely. I mean, 80% of autistic girls are not diagnosed at 18. So only 20% of autistic girls receive a diagnosis in childhood. That is a huge area in which we're missing people. I think we can also look at the teen mental health system and who are the kids who are going to PHPs and IOPs, and in a lot of the therapy spaces, a lot of the times they are girls. And it is everybody, boys are in therapy too, but a lot of the spaces is focused on girls, and a lot of the time we're getting labels of a mood disorder or bipolar or BPD at ages that we shouldn't be talking about BPD for girls. And we're never doing a neurodevelopmental assessment. We're not assessing for ADHD. We're not assessing for autism. Are we looking at OCD? What is that whole configuration of their learning style? And we're not doing that at young enough ages for most girls.
Yes. So let me ask you, because I often when I'm working with a new client, I push for neuropsych assessments like very early in treatment because I just feel like I want to understand all of those pieces and I want to make sure nothing is missed. But are there kind of like things, red flags that you notice in treatment that you're like, let's do the assessment, or like, is there more of an age where you feel like everyone should kind of have one by this age?
It's a big question. I like it though. I think so. For the first one, if there's an age, I think if somebody has been in therapy for more than 2 years and their symptoms have not decreased, then there absolutely should be a deeper look into everything else going on, whether it is biological, like you said, chronic illness, or if it's hormonal, or is it cognitive, or is it developmental. I think if we're 2 years in and there's no shift, we absolutely need to do a deeper dive. Some of the like general red flags that I have learned to notice over time is if I hear somebody talking about their brain as a separate entity of themselves. "Oh, my brain made me do this. My brain's tired. My brain this." To me, that's like a yellow flag of something's different. Because I don't hear neurotypicals talk about their brain as being separate from their self. And you'll hear a lot of neurodivergent spaces like there's the brain, there's the body, and then there's the self. And all of those might have conflicting needs. And so when I hear somebody describing their experiences with that language, to me, that's a big sign. I also think, so I have this whole timeline that I've created for like ages, and it's kind of a pattern. Hi, I'm autistic. I found a pattern in the clients that I work with.
Wait, is
So
it in your book?
that is not in my book. It is on my social media and it is a part of some of my trainings, but I don't
Okay.
think that that timeline is exactly in my book. It might have been something I like actually put together after I wrote it.
That's
Um,
okay, 'cause
so
we'll
what I
we'll
tend
tag
to
it
see,
below so everyone can access it on your social media.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, it's on the social media. So as a caveat, this is not 100% everyone. Ages will vary, symptoms and levels of extreme will vary, and this is not diagnostic. But if I see this pattern, either somebody's in the middle of it when I'm working with teens, or somebody has a history of it when I'm working with older teens or adults doing diagnostics, if I see this pattern, it's the big flag. I usually start to see in fourth grade, we have like anxiety and perfectionism start to peak. By fifth grade, the anxiety is starting to turn into negative self talk and start to verge into depression. Sixth grade, the depression is really strong, and there might be some new difficulties socializing. By like sixth, seventh grade, we're starting to see some need for control. So that might be like eating disorder behavior, that might be self harm behaviors, that might be suicidal ideation. In my group practice, when I was running groups as well, in eighth grade is when I was getting a lot of referrals from step down programs. So I was getting a lot of IOP and PHP calls from where self harm was like actively happening, where suicidal threats were happening, where drug experimentation was starting, was in like that eighth grade age. And then in ninth grade was when there was often a big crash, or like they couldn't go to school, or things got really, really reached an extreme. And they may be an independent study, they may be doing like a residential program at that point if we're not doing appropriate interventions. At this point, a lot of clients I've worked with have been on multiple medications, and the depression is still there, the self harm is still there, and the depression and the medications keep changing. Um, and by 10th grade, I see this is where I see it diverge into two paths. One, I see it continues to go in high risk behaviors and more extreme actions, or the other might go into a more perfectionistic route of really high anxiety, really like focused perfectionism, maybe not having as such close friendships, or maybe the camouflaging is really, really high, the people pleasing is really, really high. They might be super focused, and there might be like burnouts and crashes along the way, but then they somehow figure it all out by the end of the semester. And that tends to be a pattern that stays pretty consistent until early 20s, where then the whole nother pattern will kick in. But a lot of the clients I've also worked with in that eighth, ninth grade range have never had a neurodevelopmental assessment. They've never been talked to about ADHD or autism, even if they have a sibling who's already been diagnosed. That's never been part of the conversation. So I think those are, if I hear about a sibling, so when you're talking about what are the flags I see, if there's a sibling who already has a diagnosis, immediately. It's like both ADHD and autism are like 82% heritable. So if there is a direct relative, it is likely everybody is some sort of is in that family, that ADHD or autism, whichever one we're talking about. So those are big things I look for as well. Yeah, they're talking about their brain. If they've been on medication and the symptoms are still there, and if they have a sibling. And then I think self harm is a big indicator too. Because like ADHDers are 8 times more likely to self harm than non ADHDers. And autistic people use a lot of pain regulation as a sensory coping strategy. And so I think there's a lot of ways that we're self medicating with those behaviors because it's going unsupported for so long.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So I love talking self-harm, and I think that like self-harm is like such an interesting like niche. And so that is like one of the things that I work a ton with in my practice. And I remember reading this article basically talking about the predisposition to self-harm. And they talked about how oftentimes when we're actually seeing self-harm on a body in a behavior, that it has already been happening for years. And they had talked about how even if someone would admit to start cutting, let's say at like 12, 13, 14, they actually have been engaging in micro harm behaviors since like 5 or 6 years old. And it's really interesting to me because I feel like how much of what we're experiencing is like missed opportunities for conversations and parents, and like understanding like the parent coaching part of like how are we understanding behavior, right? And then also like by the time a kid is like 13 or 14 and they've been self-harming like really consistently, and that is like an embedded coping skill, right? Then there's like this panic that happens. So it's just like really interesting how it all kind of like ties together.
Yeah. Which like I've actually started talking about self-harm more as pain regulation as opposed to self-harm. Like it is a pain regulation skill, especially if a kid's doing it at 5, 6, 7. They have learned if I do this, I feel better for some in some capacity. It is serving a purpose. And so changing the language about how we're talking about it as just absolutely naming like the purpose it's serving. Because I'm sure you talk about that all the time, but like pain releases adrenaline releases dopamine regulates the brain, especially if your brain is dopamine deprived, right? And so it becomes this system, and like we know a dopamine spike doesn't last, and then like the shame sets in and then the hiding comes. But there's lots of ways we as adults we are allowed to use pain as a regulation tool that kids aren't allowed to use. And there's a lot of ways, like you're saying, kids use it at younger ages, but it's not cutting, so it's not being seen as that category yet.
Yeah, yeah. But I think that's like the missed space of like how are we interpreting different behaviors, and like I think there's a lot of dismissal early in childhood where people are like, oh, it's just a kid being a kid. It's just like, whatever, or they're clumsy, or whatever. And I just really feel like there is a lot of dismissal in the same way where we're like, oh, you're a girl, you're fine, like you don't need this assessment. Like I have conversations all the time with parents that I'm working with. I'm like, can we get her like a neuropsych? And they're like, but why? We don't need that. It's not important, right? And it's just so interesting how, as a society, I think it's easier to dismiss it and to just be like, no, you're fine, than it is to like really investigate that and to like put support behind it and really help someone else understand their brain.
Absolutely. And then that messaging, you're fine. Like, if we're having kids say something is wrong and we're saying, no, you're fine, they're like, oh, I'm fine. And how that shifts that, the own internal compass of knowing if something is wrong or not, or being able to trust if I'm in danger or if something doesn't feel right, because now the adults around me are telling me, no, it's fine. And I'm saying I'm uncomfortable. And they say, you're overreacting. Now I internalize that I overreact. And so this is actually fine, which then also creates the pattern of a lot of girls and women falling into abusive relationships or being harmed because our compass of what is safe isn't there, because at 5 we were told we were overreacting and we need to just tolerate the uncomfortable.
Do you think that tolerating the uncomfortable is part of like treatment in terms of like neurodiversity? Or is it something that like is like a harmful aspect?
I I think there's a twofold. I think that there's there's the growth space, and we know that sometimes growth can feel uncomfortable. And so I think the discernment of the conversation, is this a discomfort that is growth, or is this discomfort because it is unsafe? And if we just call everything, if it's uncomfortable, I'm not doing it, then we don't grow. But if it's you just have to push through discomfort, that can also create harm. So I think there needs to be discernment in what type of discomfort we're experiencing.
Yes. Well, and that's part of like having those conversations and scaffolding and really like being able to explain to someone what the differences are and what we're looking for. Because I do think that there's a lot of people that have been trained to push through it. And so when you're asking if something's uncomfortable, if you're asking if it's intolerable or like kind of poking around, a lot of times they're like, oh no, I'm fine. I'm fine. But that's also what they've been told.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So I think it comes back to like the buffet we're talking about of, okay, give me another word than fine. Let's find other ways to describe what you're experiencing. It doesn't have to just be fine. Is it, now my brain just blanked on words, but figuring out, is it pain, discomfort, or is it unfamiliar? And is it an unfamiliar I want to explore, or an unfamiliar that feels threatening? Right? And to give more of that information, because we want to raise kids who are being able to discern and figure that out before they go walk down a dark alley. Is it scary because it's unsafe, or is it scary because I just don't know what's on the other side yet? Some alleys are just fine to walk down. A lot of them aren't.
Some of them, it depends on the day.
I was thinking, I was just traveling, and the directions took us down an alley, and we like paused and we're like, well, it's daylight. And so we went. And so that like popped into my head.
Sometimes the day. Oh my God, I love it. Okay. So in terms of I know we're talking about kind of like pain management, right? And like that sensory input. I'm curious because you had mentioned that you have an entire chapter on harm reduction. And I love talking harm reduction. So can you give us like a really quick kind of like crash course or some like highlights of that chapter and then how it corresponds with like the neurodiversity piece?
Yeah, so it definitely starts with explaining what we talked about why pain is a piece of it and how we're utilizing it and how to have conversations with people about what purpose it's serving. But I think a big thing with harm reduction is not taking away a tool if we don't have something to replace it with. Because if we just take it away, like we know that abstinence doesn't work, there's always going to be, it's going to come back around. So instead of setting ourselves up for failure, because failure doesn't motivate neurodivergent brains, right? Reward does. So if I do well, that feels good. But if I'm just supposed to stop altogether, the odds of me stopping cold turkey are very, very low. So how can we set ourselves up for success? So the big tool that I talk about in this book is distract and delay. About if I'm in one of those peak moments, how can I distract myself long enough to delay the intensity that hopefully that starts to dissipate. And we talk about like a lot of the different tools we can use of just make a list. I'm just going to work my way through the list. And if I get all the way down to the bottom of the list and I've done all the things we therapeutically have talked about, what is the safest way for me to partake in this if I have to? So that it's not a shame-based thing about I can't or I still did, but I tried all the things. I did delay for this amount of time and it is still feeling like a need and I now have permission, but how do I do it in the safest way possible to reduce harm? And then ideally down the line, we don't get to that point, or we can delay long enough, or we can start integrate. And then it talks about like, how can we integrate all the other tools so you don't get to that point that it's that level of intensity?
You make my heart so happy.
Oh, good. I'm glad it all aligns.
No, I think when I discuss like harm reduction, I think there is this kind of this vibe where people are like, well, you're just condoning it. Well, how could you condone that? And what's interesting to me is I'm just like, I would rather someone engage in self-harm than kill themselves. And like sometimes like that is kind of like the scaffolding, right? And like to hear you talk about how like there's a distract and a delay, and ultimately at the end of the day, like they can decide if that's something they want to do at the end of it. They've like tried a lot of the other pieces, but it is about engaging safely. And then it ties back to when you had said about how like adults have access to a lot of coping mechanisms and a lot of pain management techniques that teens do not have access to, right? And so as adults we sit here and if we're saying, oh no, you can't do this, while at the same time we're getting 300 tattoos and 15 piercings and having whatever impulsive sex we want to have and are drinking and doing whatever, but then we're telling all these teenagers, no, you can't access any of this for pain management purposes.
Right. Right. Exactly. All of those examples literally in the book. Like I talk about like even like we talk about beauty, like beauty is pain, like you have to feel this, or even like sometimes people like restricting food is a part of that pain piece, a way to control. Or one of the examples I give about like taking off your corset after the Renaissance fair. Like there's a release after like that pain of being tied up, but like that is a piece that we do and that is pain regulation and that also is harm reduction. If compression is something that helps you regulate, how do we use it? And how do we use it safely so we're not suffocating, but we are getting the compression we need? So it's finding that balance. And I think when we're talking about it, it demystifies it, right? Like I say to my parents all the time, like, you have to name the hard things. If they don't hear you talking about this, they don't know that you are safe to talk about it with. So it's very direct and very upfront with all of the things is we're going to name it and we're going to talk about it so that you know you can talk about it. Because if I lost my train of thought again. Hi, welcome to my brain. But that if we can start naming this is why I need it, this is how I'm going to use it, this is what my goal is, it takes away a lot of the fear and the uncertainty. I think the scary part is when it's 2 a.m. and a parent gets woken up and a kid is needing help and there is medical attention that's needed, it is a crisis and it is a panic. But what would happen if it's so normalized in the family that the kid can come to you at 8, 9 o'clock and say, I'm having urges. Can you just sit with me? I don't want to have a conversation. I don't want to go anywhere. I can't promise it's not going to happen, but I just need you to know this is where my brain is. Let's just watch a movie. And nobody panics. And then it's just a conversation that's had.
Right. Well, because if you think about it, if we translate that to adulthood, 25, right? If someone is having those urges, they could literally drive 3 hours, find a tattoo shop that's open until 2 a.m., get a tattoo for 4 hours, and then drive home, right? And like
Absolutely.
obviously there is different levels of risk with that, different levels of reward with that, but it's like very interesting because and this is what I say to so many people working with teens is that it's not about us like stopping any of the behaviors. It's about helping them figure out how it fits into their life and what they want to use it for and what the impacts are, whether positive, negative, or otherwise, right? And like really like what their connection is to that, and is there a way that they can use it in a space that makes more sense for
Yeah.
them, right?
Yeah.
And then like how do we wrap the family around that and just really be there to like decrease the shame and to be like it's
Yeah.
okay, right? Like I get it, you're working through something and like we can do it together.
Yes. And if we're only focusing on that behavior, we're missing everything else about what got them to that moment. That moment is just like the peak of it. We need to backtrack and figure out all the other things that got them that far. And if we're only focusing on why they can't do that action, we miss all the rest of it. And that's way more important to me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And then especially if you have like a PDA type kiddo or a PDA
Yes.
type teen and you're telling them like they can't do this thing and then what are they going to do?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Um, but I do think it brings up such an interesting point because I feel like when we're talking sensory stuff, like understanding
Mm-hmm.
their sensory profile, understanding like the different types of things that are going to help them is like such a
Mm-hmm.
core part in offering like really
Yes.
comprehensive safety plans, really comprehensive family plans, like really
Yes.
comprehensive neuro supportive stuff throughout
Mm-hmm.
like the developmental phases.
Absolutely. So I think even if like things are like a meltdown, we need to know all the ingredients that went into this meltdown happening. And that's going to be knowing what is the sensory experience? Are they emotionally flooded? Is their executive functioning offline? Like, what are all of the things that happen to lead to this moment that they're in meltdown that they might be going to then pain regulation? And that's like all of that backtracking. I mean, it's the bottom up approach, right? We need to know all the context to know what we need to do for this. And that's really what the book is trying to do is like, let me give you all the context for what might be happening in your brain. And you look at all of this and then you let me know which parts of this are happening in your brain. Here's a lot of the options, and it can look like this and it can look different than this. You've named what works for you. How do we talk about what that looks like? Now, what's that action? And kind of building it up.
I love this so much. I can't even tell you how glad I am that you tucked a chapter of harm reduction in there, because I
Yes.
really just feel like harm reduction is one of the things that you can insert into almost any like theoretical model, into almost any
Mm-hmm.
treatment piece, and it really
Yes.
helps like build the scaffolding long term for people of like how do I engage in this safely, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm so stoked to read it. I'm like, so I literally can't wait to get my copy. I want to read it
Yay,
now.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited. And a little teaser, a little fun part. So,
Yes.
there are there's storylines throughout it, and there are six characters. There's four girls, two non-binary teens, and they're all named after crystals because I really like crystals and rocks. And so there are six people that we follow throughout it, and we hear their stories and their examples, and they have their whole like little archetype of different types of neurodivergent profiles. And it's like one of my favorite parts of the whole book.
Oh, I love that so much because then it's not just identifying with like a type, it's identifying with a person, right? When you give it a
Yeah.
name,
Mm-hmm.
that is
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay,
It's my
are
favorite
these
part.
are these your favorite rocks and favorite crystals? Like is that
You know what? No. I just like I started thinking about like different archetypes, and then crystals just align themselves with each of them. So we have Citrine, who's our theater kid and who like is building props for a background and is part of like running the show and like needs everything in a specific order, but is also like goofy with all of her neurodivergent friends. We have Onyx, who's like our kind of like goth punk, she, they, doesn't want to be touched. And so like she's got her story. And then we have Emmy, aka or Emerald, aka Emmy, and she's like the social chameleon, so kind of a lot of masking and trying to connect with friends. She plays volleyball and is like kind of in the group but not in the group and exploring that. We have Rose, who's the like perfectionistic, like school is very much her whole personality, very like kind of like OCD-ish, little kind of rigid, but like wanting to explore who she is outside of that. And then we have, who else do we have? We have Ruby, who's our like gamer girl. And Ruby really likes red and has her like headphones with the kitten ears and like likes to be in her online spaces with friends online. And then last we have Jade, who's a little bit older, who's kind of been through a lot of these like therapeutic programs and is kind of in the like past the rebellion stage, but kind of like I just need to get school done so I can go out in the world and do what I want to do, and kind of like take no shit. Here's me. I'm gonna take care of it. I'm sorry. Jade is they them, but so I've kind of got like stories sprinkled throughout every chapter of like their identities and what they're experiencing.
I love this so much, and I can't wait. I know I've said that like 3 times, but I'm just like, can I have my book now?
It should be to you any day.
I
Yes, and if
can't.
you're listening, make sure to like message me or comment somewhere and let me know which gem you think you are, or which combo of gems you might be.
Oh, that's true. I can't wait. I literally, so I very much, looking back to my childhood, probably would have been diagnosed with ADHD if we're talking about like current modern standards for how we
Mm,
kind of like
yeah,
understand and conceptualize like children. And it's been
yeah.
really wild being a business owner and a therapist and a mom to 2 autistic kids and,
Hmm.
like my own kind of like ADHD brain. And like, I know how
Yeah,
much this is needed, right? Because it's something that like I wish
yeah.
I had access to when I was a teenager. But
Hmm.
I am curious, and I know I have to let you go in a few minutes, but I'm curious, like, what would it have meant to you to have this book as a teenager?
Oh my gosh. I don't even know because like it was just so far, like mental health is talked about so much more by teens now that it just
Mhm.
feels so far away from where we were growing up. Um, I think it would have made me feel less alone. And I think that's a really big piece. I think it would have made me feel less like something was wrong with me. And that, like, because there was definitely like when I would have my panics, I would like hide and I have to fix it. Like, I was definitely the perfectionistic type. And um, knowing that it's okay to not be perfect and to make mistakes and like it's still going to be okay. I think that's like the big piece. Hmm.
Community, reassurance,
Yeah.
validation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
To be seen, to be heard, to be accepted.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love this book so much, and I haven't even read it yet. You have sold me. I was telling Jamie at the very beginning that I have been stalking her for a period of time, just kind of like watching all the stuff come out, the trainings, the books, all the pieces. But you also, so you are kind of like the head owner of NeuroPebble as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So neuropebble. So the name came from like penguin pebbling, where penguins, they if they like another penguin, they'll find a pretty rock and they'll give it to the penguin. So a lot of neurodivergent people, when we like somebody, we penguin pebble when like finding rocks, literally rocks, or stickers, or if you tell me you like alpacas, I'm gonna just get you alpaca stuff forever. And so neuropebbling is like penguin pebbling our ideas and being able to share that information. So at NeuroPebble, we offer neuroaffirming clinical trainings to therapists and allied professionals on a lot of intersecting neurodivergent identities and experiences. And they are all taught by clinicians who have lived experience as well. So we also platform and host other clinicians teaching about really needed topics.
Oh, I love it so much. It's amazing to me how much like your lived experience has really like motivated you and inspired you to create something that like we didn't have when we were younger, and also things that are needed right now.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big piece of it. I think the big push for the neuroaffirming platform growing is I think in 2020, when we were all forced online, we suddenly got so much representation. And while I was self disclosing before that, that representation, I just think it became so obvious to all of us that we needed to see ourselves in the people we were working with for you to like really know my experience and be able to work with me through what I'm going through. So I think that became a big part of all the work.
No, for sure. I am so glad you've written your book. I'm so glad NeuroPebble exists. I will link all of those things below too. So if you want training with Jamie or if you want to get a copy of the book, all of that is going to be linked below. And I would love to have you back at some point to kind of like chat through some deeper pieces of it. And I obviously know I'll be seeing you at the teen conference in a couple weeks. Like, I'm so excited.
Yes, I'm so excited. That's going to be really fun.
Yes. And so you're based in California. Do you offer any sort of like supervision consultation as well if people wanted to reach out for that?
Yes, yes. So if you're not in California, I do offer consultation. I can do that across state lines. I can only do supervision in California, but I do consultation, and I have a monthly consultation group if for master's level clinicians who are doing diagnostics. So we have that as well.
Nice. Nice. Oh my gosh, I love it. Oh, okay. Anything else you feel like you want to share before I let you go?
Find me on social media. I'm neurodivergent therapist on every platform. If there's a platform, I'm on it, and that's what my tag is.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I think I follow you on everything, but now I need to go back and double check because I don't want to miss any of your content.
Yay. I think I post the most consistently on Instagram.
I think that I'm the same. I'm very consistent on Instagram. TikTok is a little bit more of a slippery slope for me.
Yeah, yeah. It was
So,
fun for a while. It's changed.
yes, yes, it has. But okay. Well, Jamie, it
Awesome. Well,
was
thank
so
you so much for
lovely.
having me.
Yes, thank you so much
Yes.
for coming on and talking about your book. Like I said, I'll link everything below. I'm super excited to get my copy. I cannot wait to read it. But I hope hopefully you'll come back and kind of chat with us more about different pieces.
Yeah,
And then any upcoming trainings, I'm assuming they can find on NeuroPebble as well.
absolutely. Yep, everything's there.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Well, Jamie, it was so nice to have you. Thank you so much for joining us on Teens No Cap. Until next time, everybody.